the Iraqis can possibly think that they are ready.
So, on the brink of battle, both groups of battle planners have successfully fulfilled the first requirement of Blitzkrieg: to deceive the enemy as to their intentions. In May 1940, the Allies are totally expecting an attack into the Low Countries and have based all their battle plans on this. They do not even consider the possibility of an attack through the Ardennes. In March 2003, the Iraqis and many Western commentators are totally expecting a lengthy air campaign, while coalition forces are built up steadily to achieve overwhelming numerical superiority over the Iraqis. Then, a massive invasion was anticipated, not a surgical strike. The second requirement for a successful Blitzkrieg battle plan is to control the air. In 1940 and 2003, both the German and American battle planners have a clear advantage. They dominate the skies. In May 1940, the German Luftwaffe was a formidable force, with more than 1,700 bombers against less than 400, and 1,000 modern fighters against just over 800 for the French and British. The Luftwaffe had been built up from scratch in less than 5 years, and no expense had been spared. All its equipment was new. Its pilots elite. It had been designed specifically to support the sort of Blitzkrieg battle plan which Germany's leaders were intending to fight. In contrast, both the French and British air forces had been starved of funds until the mid-1930s and were caught in the middle of rapid expansion programs which were far from complete. Almost all the Luftwaffe's fighters were the Messerschmitt Bf 109, one of the most advanced and formidable fighting machines of the time. Almost 1,000 were already in service. It could only be rivaled by one Allied fighter, the British Supermarine Spitfire, and in spring 1940, less than 100 of these were available. The German Air Force also had 342 of the terrifying Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber, which had been specifically designed for pinpoint attacks in support of a Blitzkrieg battle plan. The Allies had no comparable ground attack aircraft. In March 2003, the coalition also completely outnumbered and outclassed the Iraqi Air Force. The full might of the U.S. Air Force and Marine Corps and Navy aviation, with more than 3,000 ultra-modern fighters and fighter bombers, and 1,500 bombers and specialized ground attack aircraft, faced a handful of former Soviet fighters which had not received any spare parts for 10 years and were barely able to fly. The Iraqis did have some ex-Soviet anti-aircraft missile units and gun batteries. But 10 years of U.S. and British aircraft imposing the United Nations no-fly zones had destroyed most of the radar systems on which these depended. On paper, at least, control the air was the only Blitzkrieg requirement in which either the German battle planners of 1940 or the U.S. battle planners of 2003 seemed to have a clear advantage. As far as being able to break through by achieving overwhelming force, both the Germans and the Americans seemed totally outnumbered. In both May 1940 and March 2003, appearances were deceptive. Next, the third vital requirement of Blitzkrieg: to break through by concentrating overwhelming force. Here, both teams of Blitzkrieg battle planners did have a clear advantage, but an advantage which was only clear after the event. In May 1940, not only were the Germans outnumbered in every other area than the air, but their tanks had thinner armor and less powerful guns than those of the Allies. The vast majority were light tanks, Panzer Mark I's originally intended for training and carrying only 2 machine guns, or Mark II's designed as a reconnaissance vehicle armed with a 20mm cannon. Both should be easy meat for the many Allied tanks armed with 37mm and 40mm weapons, capable of slicing through their thin armor. The few medium tanks in the Panzer divisions, Mark IIIs with a 37mm gun and Mark IVs with a short-barreled 75, were also outclassed by many Allied tanks, particularly the mighty French Char-B, which carried both a 47 and a 75mm gun. But the German battle planners were able to concentrate the majority of their crucial panzer divisions opposite the one sector of the front which the Allies thought hardly worth covering, the Ardennes. And these panzer divisions had been specially designed as fast-moving mechanized formations with a balance of tanks and motorized artillery and infantry, and trained to exploit an initial breakthrough ruthlessly. The German deception plan meant that the best Allied divisions had moved forward into Belgium, leaving the vital sector opposite the Ardennes defended by a few divisions of overage reservists. In the area where their battle plan required overwhelming force to break through the enemy line, the Germans had more than achieved it. In contrast, in March 2003, Tommy Franks never intended to achieve numerical superiority on the ground. 10 years earlier in Operation Desert Storm, the Allies had fielded 750,000 men and over 2,000 tanks. As March 2003 began, the coalition had barely 120,000 men against the theoretical Iraqi strength of 375,000, and barely 500 tanks against 2,000. But Franks had learned a vital lesson from Operation Desert Storm. When the Allied attack in 1991 halted after liberating Kuwait and left Saddam still in power in Iraq, many commentators suggested that it was a political decision. Others disagree, laying the blame on one of the inherent weak spots in the Blitzkrieg battle plan: logistics.
The reason that the coalition attack stopped was quite simply logistics, that the tanks had run out of fuel and the air forces had run out of precision-guided munitions.
Whether the decision to stop during Desert Storm was due to politics or logistics, or a combination of both, an important lesson in armored warfare was learned by the U.S. battle planners.
Modern main battle tanks, tanks like the M1 and the Challenger, have such a voracious appetite for fuel that you can't use that many of them and still move quickly. The old marriage of armor and operational mobility that we saw during World War II has ended. And we now have to make trade-offs between combat power, the ability to fight, and operational mobility, the ability to move large distances over land.
To get around the logistic problem, Franks's version of the Blitzkrieg battle plan was based deliberately on using a far smaller force than in Desert Storm, but much more swiftly and aggressively. Yet the press and military pundits not only expressed concern that the number of coalition troops deployed for Iraqi freedom was much smaller than in Desert Storm, but that the weapons available, in apparently far smaller numbers, looked much the same. The M1A Abrams tank, the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, the Paladin self-propelled gun. But what few laymen appreciated was the quantum leap in technological sophistication over the previous decade. GPS, the global positioning system, was now an integral part of most aerial weapon systems. During Desert Storm, only 10% of the weaponry had been precision-guided, largely by laser designators. Now at least half was. And unmanned aerial vehicles and aerial command posts speeded up the gathering of information and its assessment and presentation to commanders. The U.S. battle planners had also studied their much larger opponent. To an inexperienced eye, it still seemed a formidable force. But in reality, it was a pale shadow of even its 1992 strength. After studying intelligence reports on their opponent, Franks' planners are confident that their technological superiority will give them the overwhelming force that their plan requires. They note that there are few Iraqi units close to the Kuwait border, where their initial breakthrough will occur. The Iraqi battle plan seems to be to allow the Americans deep into their country and then try to bog them down. So the Blitzkrieg battle plan, which Franks and his team come up with, relies on unprecedented speed. The U.S. 3rd Mechanized Infantry Division, with 270 Abrams main battle tanks, will head up to the west of the Euphrates, moving as fast as possible and bypassing the major towns. Aiming at the gap around Karbala between the Euphrates and Lake Bar, less than 40 miles from Baghdad. From here, it will attack from the west. Behind it, a massive supply column will be guarded by units from the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. These will also eliminate opposition left behind by the main thrust. The 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, the MEF, with 120 Abrams, will cross the Euphrates at the first possible place, Nasiriyah, which is also the first potential choke point. It will then advance in 2 columns, towards Diwaniyah and Kut, so as to keep the Iraqis guessing as to whether the other main thrust towards Baghdad will come from the south or east. Task Force Tarawa will follow up the MEF to guard its supply routes and eliminate opposition. The British will deal with Iraq's second city, Basra, in the south. The success of the battle plan depends on one crucial principle: reach Baghdad as fast as possible.
No successful military plan is ever made in a vacuum, and certainly Tommy Franks was a great student. He's a great student of military history, and he developed a plan that certainly the great military commanders in history would have understood: Hannibal, Julius Caesar, whomever. It was very much, therefore, a plan that Tommy Franks said was blitzkrieg with high-tech knobs on. The movement, the speed, the psychological impact was something that throughout history commanders had tried to achieve. Perhaps what they wouldn't have understood is the accuracy, the speed, the precision of everything that the commanders could do by 2003. But the basic plan was as old as time.
Now, the time has come for both breakthrough plans to be put to the test. For both the Germans and the coalition forces, the theoretical part of the battle planning is at an end. The reality of the breakthrough stage, the first direct contact with the enemy, is upon them. May 10th, 1940. The Germans execute their battle plan for Blitzkrieg. Army Group B thrusts into Holland and northern Belgium, luring the Allies forward. Further south, and almost unnoticed at first, the infantry, artillery, and combat engineers of Army Group A begin to punch through weak Allied forces, screening the Ardennes. Behind them come the Panzers. Supported by Stukas, they get through the hills and woods of the Ardennes, cross the French border, and reach the River Meuse in just 3 days. Here, the French must stop them. It's the last natural defense line before the wide open plains of northern France, which reach all the way to the English Channel. But the Allied generals are focused on the threat further north. The low-grade troops defending the Meuse are given little support, and swiftly, the German assault engineers get across to establish 3 bridgeheads. Soon the Panzers are crossing. The Germans have achieved their breakthrough. They are now behind the main Allied armies with a virtually clear run all the way to the coast. March 20th, 2003. Coalition ground and air elements unleashed